Welcome to the NFP Podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together, we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week, we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. We are going to continue our discussion on the document Humanae Vitae, the encyclical. And today we're going to dive into part 2, the doctrinal principles. We are going to, if you haven't listened to the first episode, go back to last week and listen to part 1. Emily and I will take turns alternating reading this entire second part, and then we'll have a little discussion afterwards. So Emily is going to start us off.
So just before we begin, I wanted to make a couple of, in essence, corrections from the last week's episode in the first part. Something to describe a little bit more specifically would be the actual vote within the Birth Control Commission. The actual vote was 52-4 in favor of changing the church's stance on contraception, specifically the birth control pill. And I think I also mentioned that these results were given to Pope Paul VI in 1966, and it was actually given to him in 1967. And then Humanae Vitae comes out in 1968. So I just wanted to specify that before we get started in regards to last week. So, okay, here we go. Part 2, doctrinal principles. The question of human procreation, like every other question which touches human life, involves more than the limited aspects specific to such disciplines as biology, psychology, demography, or sociology. It is the whole man and the whole mission to which he is called that must be considered, both its natural, earthly aspects and its supernatural, eternal aspects. And since in the attempt to justify artificial methods of birth control, many appeal to the demands of married love or of responsible parenthood, these two important realities of married life must be accurately defined and analyzed. This is what we mean to do, with special reference to what the Second Vatican Council taught with the highest authority in its pastoral constitution on the Church in the world of today.
God's loving design. Married love particularly reveals its true nature and nobility when we realize that it takes its origin from God, who is love, the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named. Marriage, then, is far from being the effect of chance or the result of the blind evolution of natural forces. It is in reality the wise and provident institution of God the Creator, whose purpose was to effect in man his loving design. As a consequence, husband and wife, through that mutual gift of themselves, which is specific and exclusive to them alone, develop that union of two persons in which they perfect one another, cooperating with God in the generation and rearing of new lives. The marriage of those who have been baptized is, in addition, invested with the dignity of a sacramental sign of grace, for it represents the union of Christ and his church.
Married love. In the light of these facts, the characteristic features and exigencies of married love are clearly indicated, and it is of the highest importance to evaluate them exactly. This love is above all fully human, a compound of sense and spirit. It is not, then, merely a question of natural instinct or emotional drive. It is also, and above all, an act of the free will, whose trust is such that it is meant not only to survive the joys and sorrows of daily life, but also to grow, so that husband and wife become, in a way, one heart and one soul, and together attain their human fulfillment. It is a love which is total, that very special form of personal friendship in which husband and wife generously share everything, allowing no unreasonable exceptions and not thinking solely of their own convenience. Whoever really loves his partner loves not only for what he receives, but loves that partner for the partner's own sake, content to be able to enrich the other with the gift of himself. Married love is also faithful and exclusive of all other, and this until death. This is how husband and wife understood it on the day on which, fully aware of what they were doing, they freely vowed themselves to one another in marriage. Though this fidelity of husband and wife sometimes presents difficulties, no one has the right to assert that it is impossible. It is, on the contrary, always honorable and meritorious. The example of countless married couples proves not only that fidelity is in accord with the nature of marriage, but also that it is the source of profound and enduring happiness. Finally, this love is fecund. It is not confined wholly to the love interchange of husband and wife. It also contrives to go beyond this to bring new life into being. Marriage and conjugal love are by their nature ordained toward the procreation and education of children. Children are really the supreme gift of marriage and contribute in the highest degree to their parents' welfare.
Responsible parenthood. Married love, therefore, requires of husband and wife the full awareness of their obligations in the matter of responsible parenthood, which today, rightly enough, is much insisted upon, but which at the same time should be rightly understood. Thus, we do well to consider responsible parenthood in the light of its varied, legitimate, and interrelated aspects. With regard to the biological processes, responsible parenthood means an awareness of and respect for their proper functions. In the procreative faculty, the human mind discerns biological laws that apply to the human person. With regard to man's innate drives and emotions, responsible parenthood means that man's reason and will must exert control over them. With regard to physical, economic, psychological, and social conditions, responsible parenthood is exercised by those who prudently and generously decide to have more children, and by those who, for serious reasons with due respect to moral precepts, decide not to have additional children for either a certain or an indefinite period of time. Responsible parenthood, as we use the term here, has one further essential aspect of paramount importance. It concerns the objective moral order which was established by God, and of which a right conscience is the true interpreter. In a word, the exercise of responsible parenthood requires that husband and wife, keeping a right order of priorities, recognize their own duties towards God, themselves, their families, and human society. From this, it follows that they are not free to act as they choose in the service of transmitting life, as if it were wholly up to them to decide what is the right course to follow. On the contrary, they are bound to ensure that what they do corresponds to the will of God, the Creator. The very nature of marriage and its use makes His will clear, while the constant teaching of the Church spells it out.
Observing the natural law. The sexual activity in which husband and wife are intimately and chastely united with one another, through which human life is transmitted, is, as the recent council recalled, noble and worthy. It does not, moreover, cease to be legitimate even when, for reasons independent of their will, it is foreseen to be infertile. For its natural adaptation to the expression and strengthening of the union of husband and wife is not thereby suppressed. The fact is, as experience shows, that new life is not the result of each and every act of sexual intercourse. God has wisely ordered laws of nature and the incidence of fertility in such a way that successive births are already naturally spaced through the inherent operation of these laws. The Church, nevertheless, in urging men to the observance of the precepts of the natural law, which it interprets by its constant doctrine, teaches that each and every marital act must of necessity retain its intrinsic relationship to the procreation of human life.
Union and procreation. This particular doctrine, often expounded by the magisterium of the church, is based on the inseparable connection, established by God, which man on his own initiative may not break, between the unitive significance and the procreative significance, which are both inherent to the marriage act. The reason is that the fundamental nature of the marriage act, while uniting husband and wife in the closest intimacy, also renders them capable of generating new life. And this as a result of laws written into the actual nature of man and of woman. And if each of these essential qualities, the unitive and the procreative, is preserved, the use of marriage fully retains its sense of true mutual love and its ordination to the supreme responsibility of parenthood to which man is called. We believe that our contemporaries are particularly capable of seeing that this teaching is in harmony with human reason.
Men, faithfulness to God's design. Men rightly observe that a conjugal act imposed on one's partner without regard to his or her condition or personal and reasonable wishes in the matter is no true act of love, and therefore offends the moral order in its particular application to the intimate relationship of husband and wife. If they further reflect, they must also recognize that an act of mutual love which impairs the capacity to transmit life, which God the Creator, through specific laws, has built into it, frustrates his design, which constitutes the norm of marriage and contradicts the will of the author of life. Hence, to use this divine gift while depriving it, even if only partially, of its meaning and purpose, is equally repugnant to the nature of man and of woman, and is consequently in opposition to the plan of God and his holy will. But to experience the gift of married love while respecting the laws of conception is to acknowledge that one is not the master of the sources of life, but rather the minister of the design established by the Creator. Just as man does not have unlimited dominion over his body in general, so also, and with more particular reason, he has no such dominion over his specifically sexual faculties. For these are concerned, by their very nature, with the generation of life, of which God is the source. Human life is sacred. All men must recognize that fact. Our predecessor, Pope John the 23rd, recalled, from its very inception, it reveals the creating hand of God.
Unlawful birth control methods. Therefore, we base our words on the first principles of a human and Christian doctrine of marriage when we are obliged once more to declare that the direct interruption of the generative process already begun, and above all direct abortion, even for therapeutic reasons, are to be absolutely excluded as lawful means of regulating the number of children. Equally to be condemned, as the magisterium of the church has affirmed on many occasions, is direct sterilization, whether of the man or of the woman, whether permanent or temporary. Similarly, excluded is any action which either before, at the moment of, or after intercourse is specifically intended to prevent procreation, whether as an end or as a means. Neither is it valid to argue, as a justification for sexual intercourse which is deliberately contraceptive, that a lesser evil is to be preferred to a greater one, or that such intercourse would merge with procreative acts of past and future to form a single entity, and so be qualified by exactly the same moral goodness as these. Though it is true that sometimes it is lawful to tolerate a lesser moral evil in order to avoid a greater evil, or in order to promote a greater good, it is never lawful, even for the gravest reasons, to do evil that good may come out of it. In other words, to intend directly something which of its very nature contradicts the moral order, and which must therefore be judged unworthy of man, even though the intention is to protect or promote the welfare of an individual or a family or of society in general. Consequently, it is a serious error to think that a whole married life of otherwise normal relations can justify sexual intercourse which is deliberately contraceptive and so intrinsically wrong.
Lawful therapeutic means. On the other hand, the Church does not consider at all illicit the use of those therapeutic means necessary to cure bodily diseases, even if a foreseeable impediment to procreation should result therefrom. provided such impediment is not directly intended for any motive whatsoever.
Recourse to infertile periods. Now, as we noted earlier in paragraph 3, some people today raise the objection against this particular doctrine of the Church concerning the moral laws governing marriage, that human intelligence has both the right and responsibility to control those forces of irrational nature which come within its ambit and to direct them toward ends beneficial to man. Others ask on the same point whether it is not reasonable in so many cases to use artificial birth control if by so doing the harmony and peace of a family are better served and more suitable conditions are provided for the education of children already born. To this question, we must give a clear reply. The Church is the first to praise and commend the application of human intelligence to an activity in which a rational creature, such as man, is so closely associated with his Creator. But she affirms that this must be done within the limits of the order of reality established by God. If, therefore, there are well-grounded reasons for spacing births arising from the physical or psychological condition of husband or wife, or from external circumstances, the Church teaches that married people may then take advantage of the natural cycles imminent in the reproductive system and engage in marital intercourse only during those times that are infertile, thus controlling birth in a way which does not in the least offend the moral principles which we have just explained. Neither the Church nor her doctrine is inconsistent when she considers it's lawful for married people to take advantage of the infertile period, but condemns as always unlawful the use of means which directly prevent conception, even when the reasons given for the later practice may appear to be upright and serious. In reality, these two cases are completely different. In the former, the married couple rightly use a faculty provided them by nature. In the latter, they obstruct the natural development of the generative process. It cannot be denied that in each case, the married couple, for acceptable reasons, are both perfectly clear in their intention to avoid children and wish to make sure that none will result. But it is equally true that it is exclusively in the former case that husband and wife are ready to abstain from intercourse during the fertile period, as often as for reasonable motives the birth of another child is not desirable. And when the infertile period recurs, they use their married intimacy to express their mutual love and safeguard their fidelity towards one another. In doing this, they certainly give proof of a true and authentic love.
Consequences of artificial methods. Responsible men can become more deeply convinced of the truth of the doctrine laid down by the Church on this issue if they reflect on the consequences of methods and plans for artificial birth control. Let them first consider how easily this course of action could open wide the way for marital infidelity and a general lowering of moral standards. Not much experience is needed to be fully aware of human weakness and to understand that human beings, and especially the young, who are so exposed to temptation, need incentives to keep the moral law. And it is an evil thing to make it easy for them to break that law. Another effect that gives cause for alarm is that a man who grows accustomed to the use of contraceptive methods may forget the reverence due to a woman and, disregarding her physical and emotional equilibrium, reduce her to being a mere instrument for the satisfaction of his own desires, no longer considering her as his partner, whom he should surround with care and affection. Finally, careful consideration should be given to the danger of this power passing into the hands of those public authorities who care little for the precepts of the moral law. Who will blame a government which, in its attempt to resolve the problems affecting an entire country, resorts to the same measures as are regarded as lawful by married people in the solution of a particular family difficulty? Who will prevent public authorities from favoring those contraceptive methods which they consider more effective? Should they regard this as necessary, they may even impose their use on everyone. It could well happen, therefore, that when people, either individually or in family or social life, experience the inherent difficulties of the divine law and are determined to avoid them, They may give into the hands of public authorities the power to intervene in the most personal and intimate responsibility of husband and wife.
Limits to man's power. Consequently, unless we are willing that the responsibility of procreating life should be left to the arbitrary decision of men, we must accept that there are certain limits, beyond which it is wrong to go, to the power of man over his own body and its natural functions. Limits, let it be said, which no one, whether as a private individual or as a public authority, can lawfully exceed. These limits are expressly imposed because of the reverence due to the whole human organism and its natural functions, in the light of the principles we stated earlier and in accordance with a correct understanding of the principle of totality enunciated by our predecessor, Pope Pius XII.
Concern of the Church. It is to be anticipated that perhaps not everyone will easily accept this particular teaching. There is too much clamorous outcry against the voice of the Church, and this is intensified by modern means of communication. But it comes as no surprise to the Church that she, no less than her divine founder, is destined to be a sign of contradiction. She does not, because of this, evade the duty imposed on her of proclaiming humbly, but firmly, the entire moral law, both natural and evangelical. Since the Church did not make either of these laws, she cannot be their arbiter, only their guardian and interpreter. It could never be right for her to declare lawful what is, in fact, unlawful, since that, by its very nature, is always opposed to the true good of man. In preserving intact the whole moral law of marriage, the Church is convinced that she is contributing to the creation of a truly human civilization. She urges man not to betray his personal responsibilities by putting all his faith in technical expedients. In this way, she defends the dignity of husband and wife. This course of action shows that the Church, loyal to the example and teaching of the divine Savior, is sincere and unselfish in her regard for men whom she strives to help even now during this earthly pilgrimage, to share God's life as sons of the living God, the Father of all men.
Awesome. Okay. That's a lot.
That was a lot.
But all good stuff. So, do you want to share any thoughts initially, Emily?
I'm grabbing my notes. So.
Okay. I'll go first then.
Yeah, please.
So, everything about this, right? I just love all the wording. It's written so beautifully. It's firm, it's loving, it's clear. I guess I'll start with a section on responsible parenthood, which is why our tagline for our show is responsible parenthood. Responsible love, is responsible love, because I know when I was far from my faith and far from God, or I felt like I was far from God, right? He was not far from me, but I was far from him. My life was not very responsible. I was not responsible for my decisions or for the consequences of my decisions. And there was someone to blame, or it was just like floundering, like life was happening. The world was happening to me, like kind of caught up in this chaos. There was no order. There was no reason. There was no peace. And those are all things of God. And I remember talking to a religious sister, and she said, peace is your sign that it's of God, that peace, that order. And then I remember taking a class on metaphysics, and the first part of it was looking at Genesis and how God took the disorder and created order in the world. He created night and day, and he created land and water, and he created animals, and there's this ecosystem to life. Like there's seasons that are, every year we go through spring, summer, fall, winter. Like there's just order, and order is of God. And when I think of responsibility, I think of that. I think of order, right? The ability to rationally choose the next right thing to do and to be responsible. And I think maybe coming from a place where I was so not that, to then being called to that and experiencing moments of responsibility, it felt so empowering. So empowering, Emily, yes, I can have command over my faculties, like that I can make a choice, and then there can be an outcome of that choice that I'm responsible for. Like I just find it responsibility so uplifting, whether you're man or woman. Like, it's just powerful. And to know that we can be responsible in our parenthood decisions, like, that's so encouraging, that we can pray together, we can seek wise counsel, and then we can choose with our reason, informed about our bodies, and then act according to what we believe God is calling us to for our families. Just love it. Love it, love it, love it. And
Right.
in go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
In paragraph 16, we go over the recourse to infertile periods. So why he lays out why it is different that a couple is avoiding a pregnancy and keeps to acts of intercourse during the infertile window versus a couple that uses an artificial means to sterilize the whole process, sterilize the whole cycle. And by this sterilize, we mean usually women, but of course men can be sterilized. But women are sterilized either permanently through like a tubal ligation, more firm, permanent type of stance, or through an artificial means that suppresses ovulation and suppresses the cycle. So why are those two things different? And he talks about that there. And why it is not wrong for a couple to avoid during the fertile window and then partake of intercourse during their infertile window. And again, I think it's that call back to responsibility. Like, you are a rational, reasonable human being. So for a man and woman to come together, to learn, understand their cycle, to make wise and informed decisions, to practice human virtue, right? Which is a way that we image God, because we lost that image. Like, a way that we can image God is our practice of human virtue, of self-control, of exercising true love for our spouse by denying ourselves during that fertile window when perhaps maybe interest might be a little heightened, and then to reconnect during that infertile time. There's nothing wrong there, because you are respecting the natural order, and even more so, you are growing in virtue. So there are two goods that are coming out of that. You're not interrupting the natural process as God has created it, and you're growing in virtue and in character and in your image and likeness of God. So I just thought that was also, beautiful, that they're not the same, they're different. Because people often say, well, what's the difference? And there's the difference. You can just go back and read paragraph 16 again. And then the last thing I wanted to say, Emily, was on paragraph 17, and it's the consequences of artificial methods. And this is where, when you hear people sometimes talk about Humanae Vitae, they'll talk about it as a prophetic document. That at the time, Pope Paul VI wrote this, this wasn't actually happening yet, but he predicted, like, here's what's going to happen if this becomes universally accepted. If people if we now view sex through the lens of artificial birth control and contraception is a norm, and we sterilize the marital act, here are some consequences. Now, I am not as smart as Pope Paul VI, nor do I claim to be. I did think of one thing, though, Emily, is I would say it's so total. I thought one thing when you were reading popped out at me, and he said section 17, it's the first paragraph, and the second part of the first paragraph, he talks about how reverence due to women will be disregarded. So men will begin to disregard her physical and emotional equilibrium. She will be reduced to an instrument of satisfaction of his desires. I would add to that, which I think has also come about, is women's own disregard for their own body, for their own womanhood, and looking to themselves as having a problem, right? Our own fertility is a disease and something that needs to be corrected. More so, idolizing men and the role of men as the supreme position in our world or in the natural order. That in order for us to achieve success, we have to do what men are doing. And he didn't include that. But I think that would be another result of this, of the consequences of artificial methods. If I was going to edit Humanae Vitae at all, maybe just insert that little bit to say, Pope Paul VI, what also happened is now, for whatever reason, we have idolized the role of men in our culture as being the pinnacle, the be all, the end all. And so we need to disregard roles as, women, roles specific to women, to be achieving the roles specific to men. And by doing that, we are implying that their role is superior to ours. And the church here reminds us, no, it's not actually. You are equal, but doing different things. Absolutely. So those are my thoughts.
And it causes more disorder, right? And so yeah. I once heard a doctor talk about how, this really put women that had the desire to live out their, if you want to call it gender roles, in the sense, it really put them at a disadvantage. The women that wanted to stay chaste, get married, have a family, contraception put them at a huge disadvantage. And so now you have this sexual revolution that's already coming into play at the time, but you really have no, as far as trying to quote unquote, catch a man or get a man, like your men now, are feeling free to do whatever they want when it comes to their sexuality, because of this ability to use hormonal contraception. And so it's really sad, but yeah, the women that wanted to, really live out their vocation are at a disadvantage at that time in the world, for sure. Yeah, there's so much here. Another thing to add to this specific part in the document is St. John Paul II says that abortion itself comes from contraception. And, we can see just the unfold of all of that as just those decades took place. But
which makes sense, right? Because contraception, well, now we're divorcing sex from babies.
right.
So when babies happen, this is a failure. Something has happened. We need to now get rid of this, thus
Yep.
abortion, right?
We need an answer to our choices.
And to be clear, again, in this, in what we've just read, Pope Paul VI does say, when those things happen naturally, like a miscarriage, that is not the same. And we've definitely seen a lot of political conversation now with, different states' laws and things, and people being terrified, like, well, if I miscarry or if a doctor helps me with my miscarriage, that's the same as abortion. It's not the same as abortion.
Right.
Completely different things. So I think he does, very succinctly, very directly, when things happen naturally, just they take place because that happens sometimes. That is not the same as you intentionally going in and doing something to interrupt the natural creation and, should it ever happen, sadly, like the end of life.
Absolutely. One thing is, I think it's, worthwhile to talk about that, NFP can easily get misconstrued as a focus on how to avoid a pregnancy. Okay. And so the first purpose of NFP, if you will, it's not to keep the child from being conceived. In fact, just like, we've talked about, like the catechism states that children are the supreme gift of marriage. And we know they're not a burden. Like a child is a gift from God. But just as Pope Paul VI states, there are some just reasons to discern not to try to achieve pregnancy for a certain time. And so just to kind of talk through that, because I think that this is important for people to understand that there are reasons. At the same time, if the couple doesn't fall within these reasons, we are called to discern each month, each cycle. What does it feel like the Lord is calling us to do when it comes to our family and growing our family or not? And so we want to be able to confidently stand before the throne of God, feeling like we, did what we were being called to do. And so it does take such profound discernment in this part of our reproductive lives. So in regards to like physical reasons, this could be maybe the female body, maybe there's some healing that needs to be done. Maybe there's something going on there that before the next pregnancy, something needs to be addressed. And then it could obviously be an issue with the male's body, but a lot of times when it comes to reproduction, it does fall more on the female. Economic reasons, this one's a little tricky because, as we know, we live in the most wealthiest time in the history of the world. So we have to be careful not to lean too much into the economic reasons. St. John Paul II said, "It is better to give your child a sibling than to send them to college." So just think about that for a second, because how often are we focused on the future, which we should be responsibly, right? We should be. But we need to also consider our family dynamic in the moment, and how much more trust would that take to give God the future of however He's going to do that and provide for these children that He ultimately creates. So Yeah, I feel like, we've elaborated on a few. I'm trying to think if there's anything, I feel like it goes without saying all of the things like the Little Sisters of the Poor, when we go back to section 17, as far as just the mandates that have been put on, um, different societies as far as contraception and being able to, make contraception available. And just like you were talking about, he really was a prophet in these instances as far as what he predicted without, any of this going on at the time. So yeah, I'm trying to see if there's anything else. Yeah. I think that, that's really the things I wanted to hit on. I wanted to talk through, properly discerning reasons to avoid pregnancy, because I think that's a serious thing, and we need to have confidence in our discernment, and not feel, pressured if we feel like we do have a serious reason to avoid a pregnancy. I know personally I use that term a lot with my couples, a serious reason to avoid a pregnancy. And so, yes, if there is a serious reason, then that, I appreciate that Pope Paul VI laid out those reasons. So
Right. I think the part on concerning of the church, and then we can wrap up here in a second, but I just had two other thoughts is in paragraph or section 18. And I would love to encourage our priests, right? Our fathers in faith and the guardians of our souls, our pastors, to, regardless of your bishop's, directive, whether NFP is a part of or is mandated to be a part of or not of your marriage prep that you do with your couples, I would strongly encourage you to incorporate it and to seek out laity in your congregation or online. I mean, to be honest with you, you have no excuse because there's so much virtual. Even if you have nothing, like even in your whole diocese, there's not one person. There are a lot of people online. There's so much online, and you can go back to previous episodes we've done. We have there's so many resources for you to find that you can be referring couples to if you don't feel as confident, although you should feel very confident in this teaching, to encourage them should they come to you during their marriage prep and they're sleeping together, living together, they are about to enter into a sacrament. And like with all sacraments, we want them to be in a state of grace before they enter into that sacrament. And it's very serious. And so if, just to encourage you as a married person in the church, like, please take my sacrament prep seriously. Please take my sacrament very seriously and uphold the church's teaching on chastity before you get married. And so have those tough conversations with these couples and think first and foremost of their souls and their future marriages. And they're going to thank you for that. And even if they don't thank you for that in the moment, encourage them to live chastely now before they get married, and to seek out the truth of the church's teaching on natural family planning, to learn their bodies before they get married, also something that would be great to do before you get married. So that would be my, that section, the concern of the church is, my concern for the church right now is that our vocation is being watered down, and priests are just so grateful, quote unquote, that couples are coming to the church to seek marriage, that they don't want to push them away. And I say, like, that is not of Christ. Christ does not water down the truth because he's scared people will walk away, right? John chapter 6, perfect example. He does not water things down. He stands firm with the truth and with the reality of eternal life, of God, of who God is. So you, as in persona Christi, in your role as pastors, please don't shy away from that. Please seek out resources to offer to those couples. And for bishops, please mandate it. If you're thinking that priests aren't doing it, then mandate it as part of it. And yeah, I know that's tough, but that would be my one encouraging thing for our priests. Go ahead, Emily.
I would say, just as some encouragement for that, I actually just had a conversation 2 days ago with a priest who very much is following your direction with his response to couples and their vocation. And in his words, he said, that's not what we offer here. We don't offer your plan, your family plan of, I had this baby and now I want to look like we're a family by getting married, and then I'm not going to raise them in the church kind of thing. He's like, that's not what we do here. And I could tell, that takes some conviction, and I'm sure that is hard for some couples to understand. And I realize there's a fine line. The baby deserves, the sacraments and all that kind of stuff. But if the parents are not going to comply, his take on it was, we don't do that. We don't offer that. And so anyway, I would just say that it's interesting that you just said all those things, because I just had that exact conversation just this week. So there are priests that are, living or preaching the good news for sure.
That's awesome. Praise God. And I know there are. I met really wonderful priests, but I just felt like but there's also not, just like everyone, right? And every area of life, we're all on different ends of the spectrum, maybe, or at different points in our journey. And that includes priests. So
absolutely. And I do think different parts of the country have different, moral standards than others, it seems, unfortunately.
Right. So if we can unify as a church and share this wonderful message as well with our Protestant brothers and sisters, and hope to bring about more unity, that would be great too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I feel like there's one other thing that I thought of, but it's escaping me now. So I guess that would be a good time to end, and then we'll come back next week with the third and final part of Humanae Vitae and a little bit more discussion. So yeah, that's it. You guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Bye, Emily.
Bye, Amy.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.